women, by and large, are significantly inferior to men at firefighting. Wah! Smell. I see here that moist and muddy. I know this is pretty radical thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. Fembots can essentially kiss my ass. Progressivism is a societal cancer. If you don't like it, Tumblr is that way. Oh, hi there. Welcome to the Freedom Alternative. It seems that the LGBTist lobby is on steroids these days, as it tries really hard to prove beyond all reasonable doubt that it is indeed an ideology enforced with a religious zeal and with the force of the state. It was always an ideology, but at the very least it would leave the common person alone most of the time until quite recently. The Telegraph titles, "Children who say homosexuality is wrong could be viewed as an extremist threat, Education Secretary." And the subtitle is, "Anti-gay comments could trigger a thought in teachers' minds about possible radicalization," says Nikki Morgan as she outlines anti-terror plans. They should seriously consider changing her title into Re-Education Secretary. At the very least, this move would add a level of honesty. Anyway, so the article goes like this. Children who speak out in class against homosexuality could be viewed as potential extremists under government guidelines intended to prevent Islamist terrorism, Nikki Morgan, the Education Secretary, has suggested. Mrs. Morgan said comments by children that they consider homosexuality to be wrong or evil could trigger concerns from teachers under guidance designed to help schools detect possible radicalization. Traditionalist Christians said Mrs. Morgan's remarks implied that anyone who raised their children in line with conservative religious teaching on sexuality would now be viewed with suspicion. Okay, so at a first glance it would seem to be just a part of a larger plan to curb Islamist radicalization, right? Well, as with all progressive policies, the devil is in the details. Back to the article. It follows moves to close 2 Christian schools after they were judged to have failed the government's new British values tests introduced in the wake of the so-called Trojan horse scandal, in which hardline Muslim groups attempted to infiltrate schools in Birmingham. Ofsted inspectors have already been told to assess whether schools are promoting themes such as democracy, tolerance, and the rule of law. Well, I'm fine with the rule of law, but not so much with democracy and tolerance. The meaning of tolerance has entirely been perverted by the progressives to mean full acceptance, and democracy in and of itself isn't exactly fabulous. That's why most decent and semi-decent nations on earth have limitations on democracy. The concept of checks and balances is actually far more important and worthy of appraisal than the concept of democracy itself. Anyway, back to the article. The Department for Education has issued schools with new guidance to help identify pupils at risk of radicalization. Mrs. Morgan said that this would include changes in behavior and things that they say. Asked during an interview on BBC Radio 4 if this meant that if a child questioned democracy, a teacher would have to take action, she replied, "No, I think schools should be a safe space for young people to explore all sorts of ideas." Asked for an example, she said, "It could be, for example, as we've seen, sadly, ISIL are extremely intolerant of homosexuality." Well, it doesn't really mean anything. Anyway, pressed on whether if a child said that they believed homosexuality was evil or wrong, that teachers might consider them a danger, she replied, "It could trigger a thought. It would depend very much on the context in which that was being discussed. But teachers would discuss it as they do already when they are concerned about the children who are at risk of perhaps being drawn into a gang or being exploited or being neglected at home. This is a safeguarding issues." Andrea Williams, chief executive of the Christian Legal Center, said, "Many families believe that marriage should only be between a man and a woman. Are these families now to be officially treated with suspicion and even linked with extremism? Are teachers going to be required to spy on them and even report to the police?" She added, "We are on the verge of a sinister new era of thought policing in our schools." The article is even longer than that, but yeah, we get the gist. Look, I can see the British state's worry about the radicalization of kebabs and the other nut jobs. I really do. The Saudi-funded madrasas, the Islamic ghettos, the only result of state-enforced multiculturalism really, and the reality that British citizens flee to pledge allegiance to the Islamic State are all things over which the British government should indeed be worried. But do all of these commence with some children's belief that the family is formed by a man and a woman? If that were true, then Britain would have a long history of people fleeing to Islamist territories and a long history of Islamic gangs enforcing Sharia law on the streets of London. Yet none of this was happening in 1990 or in 1970. So maybe, just maybe, it's not the belief in the traditional family? Have the right honorable policymakers considered this? Which one would be more effective to combat Islamist problem? Orwellian policies to thought police children's position on LGBT's ideological talking points, or actually enforcing the already existent laws, something which did not happen in places like Rotherham for the fear of appearing racist? Which one makes more sense to you? Harassing kids because they think having a mommy and a daddy is just normal and how it's supposed to be, or enforcing the national security laws and start investigating some of the hardline madrasas and their collusion with progressive activists such as Common Purpose? The reality is that the bureaucrats don't really want to even talk too much, let alone do anything about the kebab problem. And this isn't just Britain. Finland, Austria, the Netherlands, and a few other nations of Europe have the same problem. They'd rather imprison people who oppose Islam than dare to even acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, mass Islamic immigration followed by ghettoization isn't really such a fabulous idea. And because most bureaucrats don't really want to bring this up, it's easier to just go for the low-hanging fruit that can be framed to appear politically correct and then run with that and claim that something is being done. More to the point, this would unfairly legitimize even further the utter idiotic idea that somehow all religions are the same. No, they're not the same. British Christians and British Muslims are not the same, not even by a long shot. It's not British Christians who undermine Britain's national security or who set up madrasas. It's not British Christians who behead soldiers on the streets, and it's certainly not British Christians who set up schools to teach kids to hate everything around them. Everyone knows this, but the clutches of political correctness conditions way too many people to bow their heads and shut up about it. You can't possibly convince me that introducing state-sponsored bullying of children because their beliefs don't align impeccably with the LGBTist religion can do anything whatsoever to combat radicalization. The real world doesn't tend to work that way. You want to combat radicalization? How about starting enforcing your laws, Britain, especially those pertaining to deportation? Most of them apply to the letter to most of the preachers who are indeed the real cause of radicalization. Or how about no longer letting the left-wing cult of Common Purpose rule your bureaucracies? Or maybe, just maybe, stop prosecuting and imprisoning the people who speak up and come back to that bizarre old tradition of free speech. Any of those suggestions would do far more to curb radicalization than asking teachers to act like the thought police because the little one thinks that mommy and daddy are the best. Seriously, just leave the children alone and mind your own damn business. Is it really that hard? Anyway, with that being said, don't forget to click the subscribe button, follow me on Twitter at FreedomAlternate, visit the Patreon page, and consider supporting this channel. Thanks for watching.